Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. The Islamic Golden Age. A lot of people like to conceptualize the Islamic Golden Age as being during a certain point in the Abbasid Khilafah, just before really the time of al-Ghazali, and obviously also, before the conquests of the Mongols and the sacking of Baghdad. The Islamic Golden Age people often use as sort of a good point, or to show people why Islam is actually good, and Islam encourages maths and sciences and all those sort of sciences, natural sciences really. And therefore, this shows that Islam encourages progress, it encourages these good things. But to say that Islam is good, or that this shows that Islam is good, can sometimes be harmful. And the reason that it can sometimes be harmful is that we are using the criteria of the secularists. We do not really consider the civilization which has the most knowledge of the natural sciences to be the best civilization. We consider the civilization which has sort of the civilization which is the most pious and God-fearing, to be, the best civilization. This is how we measure the success of civilizations according to Islamic merits. And to that end, we consider the Sahaba, the empire of the Sahaba, and the state of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be the best state, even though we could say that they were not as knowledgeable as the later Abbasid Khilafah in terms of their knowledge of the natural sciences, perhaps, and we could say also the same thing. They weren't as knowledgeable as the modern states are. Obviously, though, we consider their states to be better than the modern states because they were more God-fearing. However, I don't want to just discuss that. I want to also just, as a caveat, understand that sometimes it can be useful to refute, Islamophobic misconceptions about Islam, about how Islam necessarily leads to material failure and to scientific failure. Obviously, Islam doesn't lead to that. Islam leads to success in all fields. But I still think that we do overinflate, and we do sort of sometimes submit to the metrics of the secularists, which we don't even need to submit to in the first place. We could say that, there's no reason for us to use your metrics in the first place, because who says that the civilization which has the most knowledge of the material world is the best civilization? That's, it's a claim that has to be proven. And really, if we investigate sort of the average happiness of civilizations today, we don't really see a strong connection between material success or scientific progress and happiness. And although happiness is a difficult thing to measure, because it's an abstract concept, but I think that Muslims and non-Muslims, secularists and, I don't know what would the opposite of secularists be, religious folk. Anyways, all human beings, or most human beings, or rational beings can all agree that happiness, however of an abstract term it can be, is generally speaking a net good. generally speaking. And happiness can also be a measure or an indicator of the success of a civilization. So I think it would be rational, or it would be reasonable to most people, to say that a person who has less knowledge but is much happier, is more successful, less knowledge in terms of material sciences, is more successful, or you would rather be that person rather than an extremely depressed person who has more knowledge of the material or natural sciences. And if you ask any depressed person who is maybe knowledgeable in math or whatever, if he would sacrifice his knowledge of mathematics or sacrifice his knowledge of biology or whatever in exchange for real contentment and happiness and to not feel depressed anymore, I think most of them would do it in a heartbeat. And if you ask someone who is a happy person, a person who's genuinely content with his life, if he would sacrifice his happiness for for knowledge of a material science and natural science, I think most of them, if not all, would say no, they wouldn't. They'd rather stay as they are. So I think we can all agree that a happy person who is ignorant of the natural sciences is better than a person who's knowledgeable of, or is in a better state than a person who's knowledgeable about the material sciences but is an unhappy person in general. And now if we apply this to civilizations, we see that the so-called quote-unquote civilized peoples, or civilized or modern states, like Sweden or whatever, even though nominally, I know they put them in these Scandinavian countries as being very happy by metrics, we see that they have very high depression and very high suicide rates, actually, more specifically, and we see also these high suicide rates all over the Western world. And we see sort of a correlation between the advancement of the natural sciences, so to speak, and the rate of depression, or the rate of suicide more specifically. Okay, so it's not really clear to me that it's necessarily the case that the more knowledgeable a civilization is in terms of natural sciences, the happier it is, or the more successful it is. So if you were to take an Arab country, or let's say more specifically Qatar, okay, or Qatar as the expats like to call it, if Qatar overnight became exactly like Sweden or Egypt or any Arab Muslim country, even though it's kind of a bit silly to put Qatar and Egypt in the same category, just because of how different the two countries are in terms of their social demographics and their economic levels and whatever. But I just mean a Muslim country in general, really. And we transformed it into being a second Sweden, or a second Norway, or a second Denmark. And we became civilized just like the Westerners wanted us to become. And we abolished the remnants of Sharia that we still have in our law today. How many suicides is progress worth? And how much depression among our populace is progress worth? Now, there's something I need to note, is that some people, I think, try to turn this into a discussion about or a dichotomy about the colonized world versus the colonizing world, or the formerly colonized world, or depends on if you still think we're colonized, through these American military bases, etc. But you know what I'm talking about, like basically the West and the rest. Okay, I don't want to turn this into that kind of discussion, because firstly, I think it kind of pulls down the barriers between the colonized countries and sort of lessens the wala and bara. At the end of the day, I'm not a Hindu's brother or a Sikh's brother or a Shi'i's brother just because he was also colonized or his country was also colonized by the West. I still have vast differences with them, and in some cases I actually might prefer the Westerner to the colonizer to the colonized, in some cases at least. Like I can eat the meat of a Christian, but I can't eat the meat of a Hindu, for instance, or I can't eat not the meat of a Hindu, but the meat slaughtered by a Hindu, I guess. Obviously I can't eat human meat in any case, anyways, I digress. And secondly, because it's just not accurate to simply assign suicide rates or depression rates with technological progress, because you have also high suicide rates in India, relatively speaking. Okay, and it makes sense. At the end of the day, the only thing that can give someone true contentment and true happiness is Islam, is the true religion. Okay, as Allah mentions in the Quran, that whoever turns away from his remembrance, he will give him a tight and constrained life, in that he will have a sort of a tight chest and he'll be sad and depressed, basically. Okay, and that's because you're not really fulfilling your purpose in life. And now I'm not saying that Qatar and these Arab countries don't have issues and don't have mental health issues. I don't think anybody is saying that, and I don't think anybody really is making that claim, because we're obviously not following Islam fully, in the sense that we're doing all our obligations and giving Allah his due rights. Of course we're not doing that, and if we did, we would be in a much better position than we are. However, what I am saying is that there is still a difference between a Muslim society and a non-Muslim society, a Kafir society, okay, to be less politically correct, in terms of their contentment levels, in terms of how close they feel to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if the Muslim society isn't doing that great of a job at being Muslim. Okay, all things being equal, a Muslim society will always be happier, and even in this life, than a non-Muslim society. Okay, and so to that end, we have to understand that we can't submit to the metric of developing and developed countries. Developing towards what? Developing to higher suicide rates? Is that what we're developing to? Do we really want to become an advanced economy as per the standards of the of whatever international body you're looking at, the WTO or whatever, if that advanced economy is going to turn our sons and our daughters depressed and suicidal? What's the point, really? Like, you're depressed in this life, and then in the afterlife, Allahu Alam, like God knows best what's going to happen to you. These advanced economies, a lot of the times, encourage things that are completely haram, especially if you look at things like their financial services or whatever that they offer, So I think we really have to sort of take back the narrative and stop following the metrics of success that Westerners, or that the white man, really, more specifically than the Westerners, or the rich white man, really, the rich white man has placed for us. and try to make Islam look good through these metrics. For all of the reasons I've previously mentioned during this podcast, or I don't know what you like to call it, voice note or whatever. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين.